Okay, on today's episode of Ivory GC, Jason Idilbi. Good to meet you, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Well, it's we spent some time a couple of days ago talking through your experience, and it's pretty extensive. And I thought maybe we could, you're currently a solo GC at Clear Company, an HR software company. I'll let you talk more about your own background, but figured why don't you give us kind of a high level overview of the last your last job opportunities, few job opportunities. Then we'll kind of dive into your skill set from there and how those experiences have shaped who you are as a GC today.
Sure, yeah, sounds good. Well, broad strokes, I call myself a recovering litigator. I did private practice litigation for about my first 7 or so years, punctuated with a kind of early career break where I did a federal appellate court clerkship. And then I went to an in-house role starting, around like when I was rounding the corner on my 7th year into my 8th year of private practice. I switched to a corporate in-house generalist role where initially I was part of a small legal team in my very first role, but then I took a position as a solo GC. This was in 2017. So that was my very first solo GC role. And I've been kind of in that world ever since. I mean, was a B2B fintech, which is where I've mostly been concentrated and almost exclusively within small legal departments. In my current role at Clear Company, I'm the first and solo GC again, which now marks the 3rd time that I have done that. So some might say I'm a glutton for punishment, but I just really enjoy working with entrepreneurs, innovative, fast-paced companies that are trying to make bold innovations and get new products to market. So I like to say that I'm a like sort of 0 to 1 and 1 to scale kind of lawyer. That's where I like to play.
That's great. Yeah, and we won't go into too much detail about kind of your early experiences in your career, but you started at Ropes and Gray. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what your practice was there as a junior attorney?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my very first role out of law school. I worked in the Washington, D.C. office of Ropes and Gray. I was I was in the government enforcement practice group there. So at that time, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is an international anti-bribery statute, there were a lot of investigations that were firing at the time. And so that was a lot of what I did as part of the government enforcement group. A little bit of white collar criminal defense, a little bit of some other, DOJ and U.S. Attorney Office investigations into, pharmaceutical and medical device companies like off-label marketing and things of that nature. So that was the early career. Did that through for about 3 years, and so in 2011 is when I took the clerkship that I just mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so tell us about your experience clerking for a federal judge. So it's for Judge Diaz in the 4th Circuit. Is that right?
That's right. I clerked for Judge Diaz on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. As I mentioned, I was in D.C. at the time at Ropes and Gray, right out of law school. But Judge Diaz's chambers were in Charlotte, North Carolina. So that's what brought me to this area. And this is where I still am today. Clerking was an incredibly life-changing experience for me, I would say, both personally and professionally. Professional development. It was really a great leap forward for me in my career. A common sentiment that I heard a lot at the time that I was clerking was that being a federal judge is the best job you can have in law. And what I heard often amongst my co-clerks and what I believed myself is that clerking is really the second best job in law. It's an opportunity to, just the opportunity to work with the judge in chambers, just to have that intimate kind of a working relationship, just learning a lot from, the smartest person you'll probably ever work with. Was certainly informative and eye-opening for me, working with my co-clerks who are all incredibly brilliant young lawyers. And then, not to mention, more than anything, it's really the sophistication and the gravity of the work that you're doing. And in many cases, at the appellate level anyway, clerks work for the most part on the orally argued cases, which are the ones for which the law isn't as clear cut. So you might be dealing with cases of first impression or cases where there are circuit splits and things of that nature. So it's just really interesting, high stakes work. What was a little bit different, I think, so I would say, all of that is true, generally speaking, as a clerkship experience, at least the consensus among the clerks that I worked with, at the time, and then some that I've come to know since then. But we also had my co-clerks and I had the unique experience of being the first clerks that Judge Diaz ever had as a federal judge, as a Court of Appeals judge. And
Yeah.
so so he was new to the bench. We were essentially, as I mentioned, the 0 to 1 sort of thing that I, have been tending to do in my in-house world. But that's really what we were doing then too. We were helping him establish himself on the Fourth Circuit, find his voice, set up his chambers. I mean, even just, from the day to day of, how do, phones get answered and how does mail get routed, things like that. I mean, it really,
Interesting.
yeah. So we had that perspective. Not to mention, Judge Diaz was a President Obama appointee, and that was a time of marked change on the Fourth Circuit itself, where the composition has been changing from Republican appointed majority to Democratic appointed majority. So there were a lot of ideological differences that were really starting to take hold at the time. And so we got to see a lot of cases that, split decisions. The first time around, they ended up in en banc rehearings, which means before the entire panel of judges on the Fourth Circuit. So we really had a fly on the wall sort of perspective for some really interesting things that were happening at the court at the time, which made our clerkship different from a lot of
Yeah.
other clerkships.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what would you say you learned from your clerkship that you maybe wouldn't have learned in law school or in private practice?
Yeah. So I will say, law school and private practice are great settings for learning about having clarity of thought and attention to detail. But I would say that the clerkship for me took that to the nth degree and really
Yeah.
amplified my skills by orders of magnitude. Um, when you're clerking, of course, you have an incredibly sophisticated audience in the judge that you're working for, in the parties and the lawyers that are coming before the court for their matters, and the parties that are being represented in those matters, and even other interested constituencies like the general public who'll be reviewing and consuming the opinions that the judges write. So the cases are high stakes and very, it's important to be all the more rigorous and attentive to detail in understanding the factual and legal issues and briefing the judge and helping to craft the opinions. Every word matters, and every word can be scrutinized in that kind of context.
Yeah. So tying that experience to kind of who you are as an attorney today, how you practice, what would you say, what skills do you think you developed during your clerkship that are most applicable to your practice today?
Yeah, so what I've realized in the in-house world, and I experience this time and time again, is that busy, successful, ambitious business folks don't have a lot of time in their day, and they can't really sit and ponder my musings on this or that in an academic sort of way. They don't have time to get in the weeds. They need advice that's to the point and actionable. So what the enduring lesson of my clerkship has been, and the skill that I try to cultivate every day, is just being able to distill complex arguments and concepts into clear, concise, persuasive, action-oriented kind of points.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And so you took that clerkship opportunity and you went back into private practice. So you joined a firm called Moore and Van Allen that was down in Charlotte, North Carolina as well, right? So tell us a
That's
little bit about what kind of led to that transition and what you were doing at Moore and Van Allen.
Yeah, sure. Well, clerkships by nature have a shelf life. In our case, we worked for a year and a half. Normally, a clerkship would be a year or 2 years, but just based on the calendar of when Judge Diaz assumed his position on the Fourth Circuit, my co-clerks and I served for about a year and a half. So at the time, I was living in Charlotte, as I mentioned, really came to appreciate the level of legal sophistication that happened in this market too, and I just kind of fell in love with the area. So I decided to stay put and apply for and got a position at Moore and Van Allen. And there I went to a more of a broad-based complex business litigation practice. So represented a lot of different kinds of clients, different kind of industries, different legal disputes, but generally within the complex business litigation area.
And then did that experience at Moore and Van Allen, did that help broaden your skill set, would you say? How did you say your skill set evolved during that time?
Yeah, well, at Ropes, I'm kind of mentioned I was, fairly focused on a few substantive areas. But what was interesting and different about my experience at Moore and Van Allen is, again, just having exposure to a lot more different industries and types of matters. I will say, litigation in general is a procedure-driven legal area. There is the filing of a complaint. Of course, like there's pre-litigation matters, right? Like there can be, cease and desist letters and nasty grams and things that get exchanged. But, once you're in litigation, there's a complaint, there's an answer, there's maybe dispositive motions, there's discovery, maybe dispositive motions again, all of the discovery process, very, very procedure oriented. And so once you understand the procedures, it can be, kind of plug and play for different types of matters. And so I got to work on a very broad-based, set of different, working in different industries, different types of matters, different kind of clients, spanning, as far as topic areas, spanning commercial real estate disputes, intellectual property, trademarks, partnerships, employment litigation, financial regulatory investigations, and on and on. The complex business litigation gave me a very broad experience across different industries and subject matters.
So that was kind of the end of your career as purely a litigator. You went in-house from there. Talk a bit about kind of that transition, what company you joined and what you were doing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the story of my in-house transition is really more about how I just I enjoy litigation, but to me it just wasn't well suited to kind of my collaborative working style. And so for that reason, primarily I decided to think, well, what can I do to help, instead of helping clients avoid catastrophic kind of outcomes or things like that, like how can I be a part of helping clients create business value and achieve their business objectives? So that was the sort of itch that I wanted to scratch as I was thinking about an in-house transition. And so I was able to make that, luckily, and again, not just in the context of wanting to go into going in-house, but really also not wanting to do litigation as my primary focus anymore, but being more of a corporate role. So I was able to land, after some period of time looking for this kind of role, I was able to land a corporate generalist role as senior counsel of a highly regulated financial market utility. It operates the rails that move money around. So ACH, wire, check imaging. Now there's a real-time payments platform that they operate. So that was not only my first in-house role, but my first exposure to really to the fintech arena as well.
Yeah, and how did you see your communication style change just even at that early stage of an in-house career? What did you take from your experience as a litigator, and would you leave behind?
Yeah, the main, one of the main takeaways. Well, let me get to the what I left behind. I sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier too. In private practice, it's very customary for private practitioners to put together lengthy legal memoranda and analyses and all sorts of trying to address all sorts of risk and try to give the most rigorous advice that a client can receive about different situations and the circumstances that they're in. That has to be left behind in the in-house world. As I mentioned, there's really no time for that, both for you as the in-house lawyer as well as for your business folks to consume that sort of information. So that was certainly one thing that was quickly left behind. But one thing that persisted was just the approach to proactive and transparent communication. For the customers that I worked with in private practice, the litigation wasn't necessarily a common thing that they experienced. There are companies, of course, that deal with litigation, to the point where they have in-house litigation teams of 50, 100 people or more. But for the kind of clients that I was representing, litigation wasn't very much a part of their day-to-day. And so it's a fraught experience and it's an uncertain experience for those clients. And so the main thing that I took away was to just try to empower them by informing them about what's to come. This is kind of where we are. These are the things that are coming around the corner. This is what we need to do. And so having that transparency and that level of here's what you can anticipate was very helpful to my clients as a litigator, and that's what I took in-house as well. Just being able to kind of tee up what things look like and what the twists and turns can be for something as we go forward.
Yeah, and I mean that transition not only was kind of away from private practice into in-house, more generalist practice, but also it was your first foray into getting to know the company's business inside and out. But you're also in a highly regulated industry. Talk a little bit about how you adapted to that, and what helped you kind of get up to speed in a pretty challenging environment, I'd say.
Yeah. So one thing that you have an advantage of, and in the inside track when you're an in-house lawyer, is the ability to know your business and their risk tolerances and their industry very well. And so for me, what was a big part of my education and my approach to my in-house work, dating all the way back to that first experience, is I just need to understand my business. I need to understand how we make money. I need to understand what our objectives are. I need to understand how we feel about our risk tolerances and where we're willing to push the envelope a little bit, where we need to be very risk averse. And as I mentioned, this was a highly regulated financial market utility, so there wasn't really a huge risk appetite. Contrast, some of the clients that I've worked with since then. So at bottom, you have to be oriented in these aspects of your business and give the most pragmatic advice based on what you know of your business. So at the time, it was very important for me to attend product meetings, we didn't have earnings calls per se, but being able to review the discussions that would happen at the executive level or board meetings and things like that, just to keep my finger on the pulse of kind of what's going on with the company and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's great. And so after that role, you took your first role as a general counsel. That was at a company called Passport, also in Charlotte, North Carolina, Series B startup at the time. Talk a little bit about what that transition, how the company may have differed, what was similar, things like that.
Yeah, it was essentially as much of a night and day experience as you can imagine. On the one hand, my first company, the Clearinghouse, was a 150-plus-year-old company. Its origins date back to the 1850s or so, and like I said, highly regulated. And then to Passport, which had been around for about 10 years or so at the time, Series B startup in the parking technology space. I was, I think, I was like employee number 60 or something like that. The first, excuse me, solo GC the company had. And so I would say there was a lot to, my directive coming in was really to help the company accelerate the commercial contracting aspect. I mean, they were at that inflection point, which a lot of Series B companies get to, of like, okay, you're past survival mode, you're now really in growth mode. And so they needed a lot of help on the commercial contracting side of things with customers. But then, step in and realize there's a lot of other things that just, by virtue of the fact that there hadn't been anyone there, that hadn't gotten the kind of attention that they needed. So, an example would be, a privacy policy that was really, outdated and needed some attention. So the pace was just substantially faster at Passport, and my scope was a lot bigger, having been, at the Clearinghouse, senior counsel, part of a small team, having a fairly, I don't want to say siloed, but having a somewhat, narrow swim lane, to being at, general counsel of a fast growing startup where, my head is constantly on a swivel, and it's like there's so much to do, and the company is really moving at a very fast pace with a very high risk tolerance, right? Which is a huge contrast from where I was before. And that's common for startups. And, I don't say that in any kind of, pejorative way. I mean, sometimes the fact is you have to take risks as a startup to succeed. And so that was kind of the company's perspective at the time. And I tried to do my best to put some responsible guardrails in place there.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, 'cause when I started working with one of our clients, Ivory was really the first kind of outside GC firm that the company worked with. And before, we were working with a company that was a former JD who wasn't even a licensed attorney, but was managing kind of the legal work within the company. And it took maybe a week or two to identify there's so much more here that can be done, that just an untrained lawyer wouldn't have the knowledge of what they didn't know,
Right.
to know kind of what needed to get done. So it's certainly, I'm sure there are others out there that have had similar experiences.
Yes. Another
When
thing is
you so
not enough
Yeah,
time in the day also. I mean, not
yeah,
just necessarily not knowing what to look for, but there's a lot to do and not enough time in the day to get it done. So some things get attended to and some things don't. And that's just,
yeah, that's
we'll come
right.
back to that,
That's
I'm
right.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so after Passport, you joined a later stage startup in Charlotte called Avid Exchange. There, you were deputy GC, and you helped take that company public. Why don't you talk a little bit about that experience and what you learned and what you've applied to your practice today?
Yeah. That was something that was a very interesting process. I knew starting at Avid Exchange that this was a possibility. It wasn't a certainty when I started, but I knew it was a possibility, and so that was a big part of the draw for me. And just knowing that there would be a lot to do as far as public company readiness, and then adjusting to life as a public company as well. So I was really drawn to that aspect. I think you may have heard this from others in our world, but it's kind of considered a high watermark for any tech or any sort of startup GC or startup lawyer to work on something like this, just given the level of complexity and just sheer you know level of work that has to be done for this. So I was really drawn to that. As the newest lawyer who didn't have a full plate already, I was pulled into a lot of those work streams around the public company readiness. And at the time I hadn't had a lot of securities work, so it was really on the ground, in the trenches kind of work, but incredibly interesting work. And again, one of these moments where black swan moment where I really felt like my skill set expanded by orders of magnitude in a very short amount of time. And yeah, we listed on the NASDAQ. They did a roadshow. We had the first trade from within our building in Charlotte. I think it was the first time NASDAQ had ever done that. So it was just an incredible
Yeah.
experience, professionally and on a personal level.
So what would you say was either one of the greatest challenges, greatest successes that you had in that role of going through the public company preparedness and then ultimately the IPO?
Yeah, so I think there's a temptation to think about these things as okay, like once you're there, it's done. And a lot of in my private practice colleagues, same thing. Like you close a deal or you close a litigation matter and then it's done. Well, in some cases, that's really where it starts, right? So to
Yeah.
me, the pre IPO work was just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there was a lot to do, after the fact, as far as just maintaining the sort of discipline and controls and building out policies and procedures that are befitting or that are necessary, in fact, for a public company. So that came in a lot of a lot of different perspectives, but even something like, well, how do we manage insider trading rules and blackout periods and things like that around earnings calls, and who do we consider our insiders for purposes of this policy and whatnot. So just a lot of different nuances that spread across multiple segments of the business.
So how long were you at Avid Exchange before the IPO? Do you remember?
It was about a year, a
A
little
year,
less.
okay. And then how did your role? I mean, did it change? Were you hired really to help the company go public, and so or was there a change in your role kind of before the IPO, and then what did it look like after?
Yeah, so I would say I really came in more so to enable the selling teams. I mean, the commercial contracting aspect was a
Yeah,
big part. That and sort of a privacy component and data security, because I had that background in that as well. The securities work just kind of came to me like I said, because I was the newest lawyer and I just didn't already have a full plate. I wasn't really hired particularly for that. So I picked that up. I will say, I mean, after the IPO, some of that to the extent like leveled off a little bit. And then of course, as a public company and this was during COVID as well. So a company like Avid Exchange was actually benefiting from this sort of shift to more remote work and more automated cloud-based processes than paper-based processes. Avid is in the accounts payable automation space. So we saw a noticeable uptick due to both the exposure that we had as a public company now, as well as the fact that the company was growing significantly. A lot more work sort of came back around to me, like on the commercial contracting space. So I will say, just naturally, the IPO, the public company work tapered off. But then, like I said, there were these ongoing, initiatives that we had to work on that I just kept on my plate as sort of a derivative of the earlier work.
Yeah. So do you remember how Avid Exchange kind of divided the work for the IPO preparedness piece and the ultimate IPO among your outside counsel partners and your in-house team? What did that look like?
Yeah, so Avid's legal team at the time was pretty small. It was I was the fourth lawyer, and so we had 4 lawyers and 2 paralegals for like a 1,700 person company with hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So pretty leanly staffed.
Yeah.
Our GC took on the bulk of the securities work, and again, he sort of tagged me for some things as well. Outside counsel was heavily involved in that. I mean, our GC did have prior securities work, so that was a real benefit, to our company and to him being able to oversee that work. But it's a huge lift. I mean,
yeah,
I won't even begin to tell you like the outside counsel fees and bills that we were receiving at the time. But no, I mean, I would say it's not possible for an in-house team to do that kind of work on their own. Like it's heavily, in need of outside counsel, like really sophisticated outside counsel who've done this kind of work before to manage that process.
So provide an example of what, the in-house team would handle in that process and how you worked with your outside counsel partners.
Yeah, so an example, could be like this. So let's say we're drafting, our prospectus, and there's a lot of information about the company and risk factors and things like that. So let's say outside counsel would take the first cut of that. The in-house lawyer's responsibility was, okay, well, all of these things need to be fact checked. We're not necessarily the source of truth on these things, so we have to coordinate a lot internally with our colleagues to make sure that we're stating everything correctly, that we're not omitting anything. Of course, that what you realize in this public company process is that around material misstatements or material omissions, right? Like things that you might have said like through no malevolence or anything like that, you just have to bring an extra level of rigor and scrutiny to. So it was a lot of guiding our colleagues with that. A lot of involvement with the finance office as well. I mean, a lot of the IPO process is financially driven. So it was coordinating a lot with the finance team and making sure that everything was kind of stated correctly and all of that.
Was there, after Avid Exchange went public, did you see substantial growth through the offering, or was it a pretty steady growth? In other words, if it really took off, how did that change your day-to-day or not?
Yeah, I mean, the company, I couldn't, tell you in percentages of growth over time at this point, but yeah, I mean, the company continued to do well. It was a blockbuster IPO by all measures, and yeah, I'd say once my plate cleared off for some of the IPO stuff, there was a lot more to do on the commercial contracting aspect, and there was an uptick in that kind of work. And related to that, and this is a challenge that we're seeing at my current company as well, events like that and that kind of growth gets you into a higher like upmarket sort of tier of customer as well. And so not only does volume pick up, but the sophistication of the customers can pick up too. And so, a provision in your terms and conditions that might never have been, questioned before is suddenly getting a lot of attention. And so there just ended up being a lot more legal involvement that was necessary.
Yeah. So after Avid Exchange, yeah, you went to a company, is it called Nitro? As in
Nitro.
your solo GC there?
That's right. Yep, Nitra. I was employee number 10 there. That was a seed stage startup, just really getting off the ground at the time that I joined. So essentially, think about it as like credit cards and financial products for medical practices, privately owned medical practices. In some
Okay.
cases, one clinic or two clinics. In some cases, perhaps some slightly consolidated like regional clinics, or maybe even some private equity owned groups of clinics, things like that.
Employee number 10, that's pretty early to hire an attorney. What I mean, is it a result of being in a highly regulated industry, or what was some of the background there?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, primarily it. Although I will say, I got hired as a lawyer and to also be, um, a bench player on some other things too, like HR and whatnot, because it was just a small company. And, there was a lot of intersection between, HR and hiring and employment issues and what I was doing. So officially, I was the general counsel, but sort of unofficially, I had a couple of other titles too, including, HR and compliance and whatnot. But a lot of what drove me being there that early stage was the fact that we're getting into credit cards and loans, and those
Yeah.
are heavily regulated, or they can be heavily regulated spaces. I mean, in the business context, not quite as much as in the consumer space, but still there's a fair bit of complexity there that we had to manage through. So
Then how long were you at Nitro before you came to Clear Company?
uh 2 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it was so you were I believe the first general counsel at Clear Company. Talk a bit about the business and your role at your at Clear Company.
Yeah. So Clear Company is interesting in the sense that it's about a 20-year-old company, over about 300 employees. So whereas one might say that Nitro was kind of ahead of the game, hiring a lawyer that early in their life cycle, I'd say probably most of my leadership team would acknowledge that hiring an in-house lawyer at Clear Company was a little bit behind the curve. Um, which again, folks are doing their best, right? You don't have unlimited budgets and things like that, but it was just the right time. There was a private
Yeah.
equity investment last fall, and just a real need to look ahead at what the future would hold for the company, and the kind of volume of work that was coming in that impacted legal, and just a recognition that, okay, now would be a good time to go ahead and get this in place. Um, so yeah, I started there just this May. So it's been a little over 6 months now, and it's a lot of work. I mean, similar to my experience at Passport, and what was different about Passport and Nitra is that I joined those early enough to kind of see things as they were developing, and that's true to
Yeah.
some extent at Clear Company now. But that said, a lot of things have already happened. So I feel like I'm,
Yeah.
I'm playing. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that I picked up along the way at Passport and Nitra, having been there, to see it happen, versus now kind of like playing catch up on things that have happened here. And so yeah, it's been a really really great experience. I mean, again, heavy on the commercial contracting side, but all sorts of other issues as well. Onboarding in a completely I know you experienced this from your own company, but onboarding employees and things like that and working remotely has its challenges. It's not like I can just go listen, overhear different conversations and things like that, and pick up from just that. So it requires a lot more intentionality of me, just knowing when's the right time to ask questions, or maybe asking in a non-threatening way, hey, can I join this meeting or that meeting just for my learning.
Yeah.
Because again, I mean, as an in-house lawyer, you're most effective when you know your business.
Yeah.
It's really hard to operate as a GC, in a vacuum, or not knowing things. So a big part of my campaign over the past 6 months has been really just to get in the weeds of the business and know how it operates as well as possible. And
Yeah.
this will be an ongoing thing. I mean, for one
Yeah.
thing, I have 20 years, to catch up on. But the other thing is we're constantly, pushing the envelope on new products as well. So there's always, change is a constant, right? That sort of thing.
Can you talk a little bit about what Clear Company does, what their business model is?
Yeah, so it's a cloud-based HR software, and so it's essentially everything from an employee life cycle outside of payroll and benefits. So think different across different modules. So there would be an applicant tracking system, there's an onboarding flow, there's a performance management aspect around goal setting and performance reviews and things like that. There's employee engagement, like employee surveys and other engagement measures. We have an e-learning platform, so for compliance or product-based knowledge, anything that one might need from an e-learning perspective. We are innovating now in some AI tools around analytics and around sourcing, just kind of like complementary to some of the products we already have. So yeah, lots of interesting innovation, but
So that with a company with 20 years of experience, where do you start? What was top priority for you when you get in there? There's a lot of pre-existing information, practices, procedures. What did you prioritize?
Yeah, so this was really a collaborative effort. I here report to the CFO, which is I guess kind of mixed. That happens from time to time. I mean, at Avid Exchange even my GC at the time reported to the CFO. So he was the one that hired me, and he's my supervisor. And so he had a very a pretty lengthy list of things that he was fairly new too, and so he had cultivated as they were looking for the right kind of person that they needed for this GC role. It's like this, and this need attention, and so I understood that going into it, and that really informed my 30, 60, 90-day plan and some other things I'm doing. Of course, when I came in, it was like, okay, and also these other things need a lot of attention now too. So how do we, work together to prioritize what has the greatest impact to the company? And this is an evolving, this is a constantly evolving, area. But yeah, so it's really a matter of overall, I'd say the philosophy has been, what's the greatest, area of risk or impact to the company from a legal perspective? Let's prioritize those things. Let's get the quick wins where we can. Let's go ahead and get some things in motion for what might take a little bit longer to accomplish.
So as a solo GC, I mean, you now had that role in a few different companies. What are some of the most significant challenges you faced, and how have you been able to manage them?
Yeah, I think primarily, and we touched on this earlier, just there not being enough time in the day. There are a lot of needs, a lot of vectors for work to come in. I mean, I get Slacked, I get emailed, I get text messaged sometimes. There's a lot of different ways that work comes in, and a lot of different competing priorities. So I'd say number one challenge is really trying to triage and prioritize the work and figuring out. I do feel like in-house lawyers have a unique vantage point that we know, or we should know if it's working well, the things that are happening kind of across the company. And so that helps inform, okay, like I understand, so-and-so, like what you're working on is, really important. I'm not saying that I have this conversation, but more of like an internal conversation of like, okay, I understand that's important, but then this is something that's really strategically important to the company that's going on over here. And I kind of need to elevate, this over that in terms of my own prioritization. The other challenge, I would say, especially having come from, private practice and a clerkship, is that you can't assume necessarily a certain level of, familiarity with legal concepts. So you have to kind of take people where they are. I mean, in some of my colleagues, it's their first job out of college, and they haven't had exposure. Forget the legal world. I mean, this is kind of like their first, business exposure.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to meet people, where they are, and understanding that, how you might speak to one audience, like of your executive leadership team, can be one thing, and how you might need to speak to someone at a different level in the organization can be another thing. And you can't, assume necessarily anything. You kind of have to, understand where people are and tailor your communications and your advice accordingly.
Yeah. And if you had to identify one or a small number of skills that would make a solo GC successful, what would those be?
Yeah, the main thing that I have always or quickly learned, and something that when I've hired lawyers and other legal professionals over the years in my different roles, is that the substantive skills, your subject matter expertise and whatever it might be, like those are table stakes, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's not really where you differentiate yourself or where you provide a good service to your client. What really differentiates an in-house lawyer is in their attitude towards the work and to
Yes.
the business. How are you proactive? Do you lean into the business? Do you try to understand what the business is trying to accomplish and be mindful of, all of the different objectives and really try to enable that? People say all the time, right, that especially in larger legal departments, the Department of No, things like that. I really cringe at that attitude, and I never want to be that. I'm like, I'm the legal department of yes and, right? Like we can, whatever it is, within reason, right? I mean, we can do it. Let's figure out the right way to do it. And so it's the people that are, I think, really successful in in-house roles. The skill set is just having that high EQ and high business acumen, and just that willingness to roll up sleeves and get the work done with a good attitude.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the biggest eye opener for me when I went in-house was just when I was in the law firm environment, there was a way that we all communicated with each other. Not only lawyers on the other side of the table, but also lawyers within your firm. I mean, there's a culture there that is just so different from the culture that is in most, and particularly a technology company, but just other operations, other functions within a company just operate differently. And the faster you're able to pick up on the culture of the company, how to communicate with your stakeholders up and down the ladder, it makes all the difference in the world. And it's not easy. It's not easy. It can be a real challenge.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Can you discuss how you approach decision making and risk management as a solo GC?
I consider myself as really, I feel like I've done my job well if I have presented the risks in a clear and thorough way and let the business make the decision on sort of their best outcome. I try not to be, very prescriptive or judgmental. Again, kind of going back to the, yes and situation. I try to understand what we're trying to accomplish. It's like, okay, this might be, the 100%, this is what 100% looks like, but then here's all this risk that might come with that. How about like, let's see it like 95%, if we get 95% of the way there from a business perspective, but yet we've cut out, a significant amount of risk. So that's really my approach to it. Just advise as thoroughly as I can, let the business make the decision. One thing that, and then commit to that. I mean, one kind of mantra that we had during my passport days was disagree and commit, which is not to say that we disagreed, often necessarily, but there was this, culture of it's okay to have different opinions. It's okay to disagree. And we need to have a healthy dialogue around things. But once, decisions are committed, then everyone needs to be on the same page and, kind of engage with that goal in mind. So I very much, if I've done my part, then I feel comfort with that and feel comfort that the business knows the risks that they might be getting into and then let's go.
It's an interesting balance between I really like the idea of framing the risk. I mean, informing or providing a different perspective to the business decision makers. We do bring a certain level of experience and knowledge that may not be present elsewhere within the business. We don't want to be the department of it depends either, right? I mean, but oftentimes it does. So to the extent we can provide some clear direction around the decision that has to be made, I think great. But I love that. I view our role primarily as informing, educating, providing another perspective from our slant, and that's just one slant within the company. I mean, there's a sales and marketing slant. There's there are many others. So yeah, it's a really good approach. And we should characterize risk with a CFO I worked for at Brand Networks with magnitude and likelihood, right? High likelihood, high magnitude of risk. We're really conservative there. Low likelihood, low magnitude, we can get more aggressive there. You come up with kind of your style with the people that you're working with. So it's interesting to share our own.
Yeah, I love that framework. Absolutely.
Yeah, you use a similar matrix, I guess, of how you prioritize work. I think it was urgent important, or material. And how explain that. I'm slaughtering it.
Yeah. So, I mean, this gets to, what we talked about, challenges and just volume of work coming in, and how to, manage all of it across, competing stakeholders across the company. I think, I've had the temptation before, and I still do to some extent. I mean, this is, one of these things that's a work in progress of, okay, first in, first out, right? Like that kind of prioritization. Yeah. I mean, there's different ways to, to do it. Or, I mean, some cases it might be, someone just happens to catch me within, with a 15-minute lull, and they Slack me something, and I just like get back to them right away. And there's no real method to it other than they just happen to catch me. But I'm like, I know somebody, or maybe it's like, well, I know I can do this, like I can crank this out in 30 minutes, but this other thing is going to take me, 2 to 4 hours. So let me go ahead and do the 30-minute thing. None of these things are necessarily the best way to, approach it.
Well, the dreaded instruction I would get from a business person is, oh, this should be a quick one. So, I've got about 30 quick ones on my list to do. So if I just did all the quick ones first, I'd never get to the the one that's going to take 2 to 4 hours. That I've got to prioritize.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so so this does break down often, this kind of prioritization matrix that I keep in mind. But it's it's a matter of it's like pairing urgency and importance, right? Like is something urgent and important? Is it urgent but not important? Is it important but not urgent? Is it neither important nor urgent? And again, we get the benefit as in-house lawyers, again, if it's working right, of having the more holistic perspective on these things across the company. So that's the lens that I try to bring to what I do. Again, it breaks down often, and maybe sometimes like, okay, well, you have this this Jenga block worth of time that, okay, you can fit this 30-minute or 15-minute NDA review in, right? So but it's a helpful construct for me to think about how I approach prioritization.
Yeah, I really like that. And when we were preparing for the episode, and you made a note about legal operations and really trying to how to use technology and processes to do more with less. Talk about what's been successful for you in that regard.
Yeah. So I always strive for building at the outset what are scalable solutions. So two things: scalable solutions and self-service solutions. Again, if you're to take, if you were to think of things as like the not urgent and not important, like we need to sign an NDA with so and so. Okay, that's important, right? But you can use, it's not important such that the GC of, an overworked GC needs to work on that. If we have a good template that's, mutual and kind of even-handed, we can send our NDA. You sales colleague, because we need to share our SOC too, you can send our form NDA and it should sail through. Otherwise, it could take me 3 or 4 days to get to it. And then, in the sales cycle, that just kind of, amplifies. So I guess let me talk about kind of the self-service aspect of it. So I do try to have, a fair bit of, okay, what I think are fair terms, or even, opportunities, like thinking about what are kind of low risk, like in your vernacular, low risk, low magnitude kind of contracts where I don't necessarily need to review them, or I only review them if, there get to be issues around, limitations of liability or indemnifications, things like that. So I do believe in, empowering colleagues. This is less like legal ops, as more of just, philosophy. I mean, I think it's legal ops in the sense of like, okay, well, here's a template you can run with, like just go get that executed, and then, make sure that I have it back so that we can, put it in our contract repository.
Sometimes legal ops is taking the legal out of it, right? I mean, you just move the ops to another function that can run on their own, that's been kind of pre-approved. It's got the legal stamp of approval, but doesn't have to be done by a lawyer, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And related to this point, I mean, there are technologies PandaDoc is an e-signature platform, and DocuSign. I mean, they have these power forms and smart forms and things like that. Where NDAs can live in links, and you can just send a link. The counterparty types in their signature, name, and right. So there's definitely an intersection, with legal ops when it comes to some of these things. So certainly, carving out things that don't need legal review, I think is important. And then the first part of it that I was mentioning would be, in the nature of, having just, building that scalable solution at the outset. Okay, we have a new kind of relationship. We're going to see this relationship again. I'm going to take care at the beginning to frame it, to be thoughtful about this, get this in a kind of structure that's repeatable, that's fair, that's repeatable, that's consistent. We're going to kind of do it right the first time. I will say, here I haven't been able to do a lot of legal operations quite yet, but some things that I've been thinking about that I've done in other areas would be around contract lifecycle management. We might talk about this in a little bit, but AI can really support that, or even I think it's impossible to talk about legal operations nowadays without talking about AI. So
absolutely, we're definitely going there. Yeah,
we're definitely going there. Yeah, again, so contract lifecycle management, matter management kind of operations, especially as I would hire teams, like, okay, who gets what? How do we track the execution of things? I definitely have this in kind of my long-term roadmap here at Clear Company, and I've done that before, and I think that's really helpful. But for now, I just have some more urgent priorities.
Yeah. Have you come across a technology platform or tool that's been particularly helpful for you in your practice?
Yeah. So at Passport, I implemented a matter management system that was called Zakia with an Xakia. Pretty lightweight and customizable, not very expensive. I hope they don't see this and decide, oh, we can price this product more expensively now. But it was great in the sense that a lot of these technologies come with just heavy tech burdens. I mean, we think about this in the context of our company too, and how we design at Clear Company, how we design our product. We don't want this to be that. We want it to be like HR can purchase this, not that IT needs to be involved in purchasing this.
Right.
So there are a lot of solutions in the tech space for all sorts of departments that would have just a lot of overhead. And so Zakia was pretty lightweight. I could customize a lot with it. It was just essentially a ticketing system, but more with legal departments in mind. And so I really loved that. I was able to manage it myself. I mean, I sort of self-implemented with some support from an implementations person there. And it really helped to just manage, it had great analytics and reporting capabilities. I was able to kind of keep up with things in different statuses. One thing that, I mean, it wasn't really for this purpose, but, the constant grumble that lawyers hear is, oh, things are taking too long in legal. And I'm like, actually, this sat in legal for 3 days. And then it sat with our counterparty for 3 weeks, and then you sent it back to me, and it was back in legal for 12 hours, and then it was back. So
So there are a lot. It's been. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm always interested to hear the different perspectives on contract lifecycle management or matter management systems. I mean, I was asked to evaluate the tools out there at the time. This is probably 3 to 5 years ago at 2 different companies, just to kind of get a feel for what's out there, trying to bring more process systemization within the legal function. And I mean, one of the challenges that I saw was you have these tools out there that provide robust functionality, can do a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but it requires quite a bit of training and quite a bit of customization for your company's process. We've opted to do things a bit differently at Ivory, where I would like our clients, business and legal, really, to have as kind of light of a touch as possible from the tech that we use, so that your day-to-day really shouldn't change. Hopefully we're decreasing the amount of emails you get, because we're trafficking a lot of our internal correspondence through Teamwork. It's a platform that we use, but it's much less expensive. You don't have to train the chief client officer or the chief financial officer who doesn't want to learn how to approve a certain matter through a new platform. So there are a lot of different strategies out there, and some of those contract lifecycle management platforms can get very expensive, and they can be intrusive. So there are alternatives out there. I always appreciate hearing what's worked for others.
Yeah, and the great thing about this day and age is that there's no end to innovation in this space, and new companies coming online. I mean, I think the flip side of that is that you always have to do your diligence and make sure that you're picking a solution that will have some staying power. I mean, the worst thing you could do is go through this costly sourcing process and implementation only for the company to fail. So there's peril and a lot of opportunity, I would say.
How are you? So we talked a little bit about AI. How is that intersecting with your role both internally and how Clear Company's implementing AI, and then perhaps if you're using any tools to facilitate the legal function, if any of them have AI components, how are you seeing that come up?
Yeah, so on the latter, I'm not really using anything AI related to your company now. I mean, there's a lot of things that I have been interested around. For example, using different kind of services to summarize contracts or kind of flag the more sensitive provisions. I mean, I've heard a lot of different technologies do this in different ways, but fundamentally, it's facilitating and accelerating your review of kind of standard agreements and just quickly pointing out. So there's a lot that I would like to explore with this. Again, just it hasn't been a priority yet, but yeah, I mean, especially I think this is really an imperative for legal departments, for me or legal departments of any size. And I mean, we can maybe come back to this later, but there's a lot of budget pressure on legal teams across the board, where cost centers, right, outside counsel bills are kind of out of control. So the more that I talked earlier about business teams self-serving, I think the more that legal teams can self-serve and be able to be more efficient and create higher value for the organization, the better as well. To the first part of your question, internally, I mean, there's an ongoing, discussion with multiple stakeholders on this topic, because we want to balance, the use of these technologies and the opportunities they have for us to accelerate what we do internally. Again, freeing up our colleagues' time from heavy admin type work or low complexity work to the higher value add more strategic work. So there's a lot of, there are some tools that we're using now. There are some tools that we're exploring, but yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. Again, it's a kind of brand new territory, so we have to be mindful of the risks that come with it. And I think this is a kind of a common experience in the tech world of like shiny object syndrome, right? Like this permeates to like, okay, well, we see this in the market, we want to offer this, or we see that we can buy this and it could, do X, Y, Z for us. And it's like, great, but let's put in the appropriate guardrails. Let's understand this technology, understand how it can work for us for the long term, and understand, how it might create some risks for us. So it's a push and pull, and there's no easy answer, but we are at least cultivating a good good internal hygiene around this, and some very productive conversations around it.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, we're trying at Avid to just keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening out there. There's definitely a lot of shiny objects, and the more time you spend, I think, evaluating these tools, the more it becomes clear that this is very early in the age of AI, and so there will be consolidation and the like. But we have implemented a tool called Ivo that we think like you said, it kind of a tool that helps review and facilitate the markup of commercial contracts primarily. There's definitely promise there. I mean, there will, I can say with a high degree of confidence, in my opinion, there's a place for these tools in doing the first pass through an agreement. If you are doing the same type of agreement, either a customer agreement or you're doing a lot of third-party partnership agreements, and you have a playbook that you can follow, taking that playbook, putting it into Ivo, and letting Ivo take the first pass of a markup gets you some of the way there. Yes. How much is some, right? Is it 20%, 40, 60? It's certainly not 80 or 90 or 100 even, but yeah, there's definitely room for that type of technology. We're also, Co-Counsel from Thomson Reuters. Mm-hmm. provides some citations to practical law and Westlaw resources that we found to be pretty helpful too. So yeah, a lot of promise, but you wonder, and those tools tend to be actually a little more affordable than I would have thought after reading how expensive it is to develop these tools. But but yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be practicing law and seeing how these products are named co-pilot or co-counsel, or right. I mean, they're not flying solo by any means, but certainly room to make you more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how Ivo is basically branded, like Ivory, right? I mean,
yeah, that's right.
That was a
exactly
nice
right.
benefit. Good job.
Well, Jason, we like to end these episodes with advice that you would give to a junior counsel aspiring to be where you are today. What would you have liked to have heard when you were getting started as a young lawyer?
Yeah, the thing that I come to really is, and maybe nobody needed to tell me this because I was already doing it in a way, not knowing it, but don't be afraid to take risks, right? I mean, I think by nature, lawyers, we get into this line of work because we're risk averse type folks. And, I've taken all sorts of Enneagrams and disc profiles and things like that. And, caution is definitely one, up there for me.
Sure.
But in my personal life, or I mean, in my professional life, I've been able to de-risk decisions, and it's really made all the difference. I mean, somebody might have said to me, you have no business leaving a well-established, 150, 160-year-old, company with a really stable trajectory to join a Series B startup that could crash and burn within, 12 to 18 months. At multiple points along my career, I've taken, pay cuts. I have taken like a title reduction in one case. This probably isn't, expected behavior for someone in our line of work, but I've wanted to take those risks. I've been able to de-risk them in my mind and say, okay, well, what's the worst possible outcome here? And that's not so bad. And risk reward, right? It always boils down to a risk reward profile. One thing that was really validating about Passport, and this is getting to be a long answer to your question, but when I was hiring lawyers there, and I told them, this isn't for the faint of heart. There's going to be a lot of work here. We're on stable footing now, and the future looks very bright. The main, advantage for you now is that you spend a year or 2 years here, if that's the worst case scenario, but you'll be able to look back and say that you ran laps around your peers in other companies, and you'll be able to take whatever you learn here and just the scope of what you've done and what you've been involved in, and the kind of executive decisions and discussions you've been able to be a part of is not something that you'll find somewhere else. So yeah, I'd say at the end of the day, don't be afraid to take risks and see where that leads you.
I remember as a junior attorney, it was always the issues that came up during a contract review during due diligence, for example, that kind of gave me pause, like this internal pause of this doesn't feel right, or this feels like it could be an issue. And it was always those issues that came up down the road as like the important ones that the partners flagged to keep in mind or to pay more attention to or to analyze. And so over time, I began to trust that intuition of this is going to be an issue, or this is where we've got to pay attention. And that that intuition, that trusting your judgment, right? Trusting your gut feeling, it allows you to take more calculated risks, be in a position where you can put yourself out there because you've come to trust yourself and your judgment. So I think that can go a long way.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you for taking the time, Jason. It was great to have you on, and wish you all the best. And hopefully you're on another episode here soon.
Likewise, yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it.